The Road That Chose Us, Part 2. I rode south for 2 days before I finally admitted I was looking behind me. Not constantly, just often enough to make Dagger notice. Every few miles, his ears would turn back toward me, as if he were asking why a man who had spent 3 years running from his past suddenly cared so much about what he had left behind. I did not have an answer for him. Mara had chosen her road. That was what I kept telling myself. She had driven away from the old Corran ranch, alive, free, and finally heading somewhere because she wanted to go there. I had done what I promised. I had kept the road open. There was no reason to expect our paths to cross again. But reason has never had much control over the things a man thinks about when the sun goes down. At night, beside a small fire, I found myself remembering the careful way she smiled in Ruby's diner, the way she had touched Dagger's nose before leaving, the way she had said my name like it belonged to someone worth remembering. I had spent years trying to become invisible. Mara had looked straight at me. That was the dangerous part. On the third morning, the weather turned. The sky came down low and grey over the plains. The air smelled of wet dirt and electricity. Somewhere beyond the southern hills, thunder rolled like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor of heaven. Dagger did not like it. Neither did I. We were following an old service road that ran beside the highway when I saw something tied around a fence post, a strip of red fabric. I stopped. The cloth snapped violently in the rising wind. I knew it. Mara had been wearing a dark red scarf around her neck when she left Denton. I climbed down and pulled it loose. One end had been torn, not untied. There were tire tracks in the soft ground leading away from the highway and toward the hills. Fresh tracks, deep on one side, shallow on the other. A vehicle moving fast, or losing control. I folded the scarf and put it inside my coat. "Looks like South isn't done with us yet," I told Dagger. We followed the tracks. They led through a narrow opening between two ridges and down toward a dry riverbed. At least it had been dry before the storm clouds arrived. Mara's truck sat crooked beside the remains of an old wooden bridge. The front tires were buried in mud. One door was open. The windshield had cracked near the driver's side. Mara was nowhere in sight. I was out of the saddle before Dagger had fully stopped. "Mara!" The wind carried my voice down the riverbed. No answer. I checked the truck. Her bag was still behind the seat. The keys were gone. There was a small line of blood on the cracked windshield, but not enough to tell me anything except that someone had been hurt. Then I saw the footprints. 2 sets. One was Mara's. The other was smaller, a child's. They led toward the canyon. I followed them on foot, leading Dagger behind me. The thunder was closer now. Rain had begun to fall in large, scattered drops that darkened the dust. The dry riverbed would not stay dry for long. I found them half a mile into the canyon. Mara was kneeling beside a young girl beneath a ledge of rock. The girl could not have been more than 10. Her dress was torn at the knee, and one ankle had already swollen beneath her boot. Mara looked up when she heard us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Relief moved across her face so openly that it almost stopped me where I stood. "Coy." There it was again, my name in her voice. "What happened?" "I saw her near the bridge," Mara said. "She ran into the road. I turned too fast and lost control." The girl watched me with frightened blue eyes. "What's your name?" I asked. "Ellie." "Where are your parents, Ellie?" She pointed deeper into the canyon. "My father's hurt. Our wagon fell." "Wagon?" Mara nodded toward the cliffs. "There's a small settlement beyond the ridge. No proper road. Her father transports supplies with horses. One of them panicked during the thunder." Ellie grabbed Mara's sleeve. "He told me to find help." I looked toward the sky. The clouds had become almost black. "How far?" "Maybe another mile," Ellie said. "We don't have much time," I told Mara. "When that rain hits the northern hills, this canyon will fill." "I know." I looked at the girl's ankle. "She can't walk." Mara moved closer to her. "Then we carry her." There was no hesitation in her voice. 3 days earlier, she had been running for her life. Now she was willing to walk deeper into a storm for a stranger. I should have been surprised. I wasn't. I lifted Ellie onto Dagger. Mara walked beside her, keeping one hand against the girl's back, while I led the horse through the narrowing canyon. The rain began in earnest. Water streamed down the rock walls. The ground beneath us changed from dust to mud within minutes. We found Ellie's father near the overturned wagon. He was trapped beneath part of the wooden frame. One of the horses had broken free. The other stood nearby, trembling but alive. The man was conscious, though barely. His face had gone pale. Blood covered one sleeve. "Papa!" Ellie tried to climb down. Mara stopped her gently. "He needs us to stay calm." The man opened his eyes when he heard her voice. "Ellie." "She's safe," Mara said. "We're getting you out." I examined the wagon. The frame had pinned his leg, but the ground beneath it was softening. We might be able to lift it with a lever. The greater problem was the sound coming from the northern end of the canyon. At first it was distant, a low growl beneath the thunder. Then it grew louder. Water, a lot of it. "Mara," I said, "find the longest rope in the wagon." She understood immediately. I wedged a broken length of timber beneath the frame and pushed. It moved an inch, then settled back down. Mara returned with a rope. Together we looped it around the wagon's upper beam and tied the other end to Dagger's saddle. "Will he pull it?" she asked. "He'll pull if I ask him." I looked at Ellie. "When the wagon lifts, you and Mara pull your father free. Don't wait for me to tell you twice." The girl nodded, trying hard not to cry. I led Dagger forward until the rope tightened. "Come on, boy." Dagger leaned into it. The beam creaked. The wagon shifted. Mara grabbed the injured man beneath the arms. "Again!" she shouted. Dagger pulled harder. The wagon lifted just enough. Mara and Ellie dragged the man from beneath it as the timber lever snapped in my hands. The wagon crashed back into the mud. The roar of the approaching water filled the canyon. I turned toward the sound. A brown wall rushed between the cliffs, carrying branches, rocks, and pieces of broken fencing. "We need higher ground." There was a narrow trail rising along the eastern wall. Too steep for the injured man to climb. Too slippery for Ellie. The only other chance was a stone shelf 20 yards away. We could reach it, but we had seconds. I lifted Ellie's father across my shoulders. Mara took the girl. Dagger followed without being led. We ran. The first surge of water struck my boots before we reached the shelf. It was stronger than it looked. Water rose to my knees, then my thighs. Mara reached the rocks and pushed Ellie upward. I was 5 steps behind her when something hit my leg beneath the surface. A branch. My knee folded. Ellie's father slipped from my shoulders, but Mara caught his arm. "Koi!" The current pulled me sideways. For one instant, I was under. The world became brown water, noise, and cold. I reached for the ground and found nothing. Then something tightened around my wrist. The rope. Mara had thrown it. I wrapped it around my forearm as the current dragged me toward the center of the canyon. Mara braced herself against the rocks, both hands gripping the other end. She was being pulled forward. "Let go!" I shouted. "No!" "Mara, let go!" She planted one boot against a stone and pulled harder. There was something in her face I had not seen before. Not fear, fury. The kind of fury that comes when someone has already lost too much and refuses to lose anything else. Dagger moved beside her. Mara looped the rope through the saddle and pulled again. Between them, they dragged me close enough to grab the rock shelf. I climbed out, coughing mud and water. For several seconds, I lay there trying to breathe. Mara dropped beside me. "You told me to let go," she said. "I was trying to keep you from being pulled in. And I was trying to keep you alive." Her voice shook. She pressed her hand against my cheek, as if she needed proof that I was still there. "You don't get to decide that your life is worth less than mine." I looked into her eyes. Rain ran down her face. Her hair clung to her skin. She looked terrified, exhausted, and more alive than anyone I had ever seen. "I'm sorry," I said. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh and almost like a sob. "That's the first foolish thing I've heard you say. Give me time." "I don't plan to." The flood tore through the canyon below us. For the next hour, the four of us remained on the stone shelf while the water rose, then slowly began to fall. Ellie's father said his name was Thomas Bell. He and his daughter lived in a settlement called Red Mesa, 6 miles beyond the ridge. He believed his leg was broken. I believed he was right. When the worst of the rain passed, we found another route out of the canyon. Dagger carried Thomas. The second horse carried Ellie. Mara and I walked beside them. Night came before we reached Red Mesa. Lanterns appeared along the ridge, small golden lights moving through the darkness. The people from the settlement had formed a search party. When Ellie called out, a woman ran from the group and wrapped the girl in her arms. Thomas was taken to the settlement's small clinic. The doctor confirmed the break but said he would recover. Mara stood beneath the clinic's porch while the rain softened around us. Her truck was still trapped near the bridge. My clothes were soaked. One of my boots had started filling with water every time I took a step. We should have looked miserable. Instead, when our eyes met, we started laughing. I do not remember who began, maybe both of us. It was the kind of laughter that comes after danger, when the body realizes it is still alive and does not know what else to do with the news. A woman named Ruth gave us a room above the settlement's general store. 1 room, 2 beds. Mara looked at them, then at me. "Try not to look so frightened," she said. "I faced a flood today. And now you're facing a woman in a room with 2 separate beds. I know which one is more dangerous." There was that smile again. Only it was not small this time. It filled her whole face. We changed into dry, clothes that Ruth left outside the door. Mine were too large. Mara's were too small. We looked like 2 people who had been dressed by someone with a sense of humor. A wood stove warmed the room. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Mara sat on the floor beside the stove, wrapped in a blanket. I sat across from her. For a while we said nothing. The silence between us had changed. It was no longer the silence of 2 strangers protecting their secrets. It was the silence of 2 people who knew they would eventually have to tell the truth. "I thought I wouldn't see you again," she said. "So did I. Were you disappointed?" I looked at the fire. I was trying not to be. She watched me carefully. "I kept driving south," she said. "But every time I saw someone riding in the distance, I wondered if it was you." I raised my eyes to hers. "Why?" "I don't know." "You do." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Because when I was with Devon, I forgot what safety felt like. Then I met you." I waited. She continued quietly. "You never told me what to do. You gave me choices. Even when you were helping me, you never made me feel like I owed you something." "You don't." "I know." She moved closer to the stove. "That's why it matters." The fire shifted between us. I thought about June. For years, remembering her had felt like standing beside a grave. But that night, for the first time, the memory did not ask me to stop living. It simply reminded me that I once knew how. "I'm afraid," I said. Mara gave me a sad smile. "Of Devon?" "No." She understood before I finished. "Of staying," she said. I nodded. "And I'm afraid of trusting someone again," she said. The truth of it sat between us. Two fears, different shapes, the same weight. Mara reached across the space and placed her hand over mine. She did not promise that everything would be all right. I did not promise that I would never leave. We were too honest for promises we could not yet keep, but neither of us moved our hands. "Maybe we don't have to know what happens next," she said. "That sounds dangerous." It probably is. I turned my hand beneath hers and held it gently. For a moment, she looked surprised. Then she leaned forward. The kiss was not desperate. It was not the kind that tries to erase the past. It was careful. A question asked without words. I answered by staying. When we moved apart, her forehead rested against mine. "You're still afraid," she whispered. "So are you." "Yes." "Does that mean we stop?" She smiled. "No, it means we go slowly." Morning arrived clear and cold. The storm had washed the dust from the world. Every rock and blade of grass looked newly made. The people of Red Mesa helped free Mara's truck from the mud. The front fender was damaged, but the engine still ran. Thomas gave us supplies and refused to accept payment. Ellie hugged Mara, then me, though she seemed more interested in saying goodbye to Dagger. By midday, we were standing at the southern edge of the settlement. The road split in two. One direction led toward Santa Fe. The other crossed the mountains toward a town called Loma Verde. Mara unfolded a map across the hood of her truck. "Santa Fe is south," she said. "Usually is." She looked at me over the map. "Where were you going?" "South. That's not a place. It was enough before." And now, I looked down the road. For 3 years, every direction had been the same, because none of them led anywhere I wanted to stay. Now Mara was standing beside me. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead did not look empty. "It depends," I said. "On what?" "Whether you could use some company." She folded the map. "I could use a man on a horse." "Only one? I'm trying not to be demanding." We started toward Santa Fe together. Mara drove slowly enough for Dagger to keep beside the truck. Sometimes she moved ahead. Sometimes I did. But neither of us went far enough to lose sight of the other. Near sunset, we stopped on a ridge overlooking the plains. The storm had left the sky clean behind us, but dark clouds still clung to the mountains in the east. The road stretched south for several miles before dividing at an abandoned gas station. Mara climbed out of the truck and stood beside me. "You know," she said, "for someone who spent 3 years running, you're not very fast." "I wasn't running today." "What were you doing?" I looked at her, trying to catch up. Her expression softened. She stepped closer and took my hand. It was such a simple thing, her fingers between mine. But after years of holding nothing except reins, weapons and memories, it felt like someone had placed something living back into my hands. Then the radio inside her truck crackled. A voice warned that the southern highway had been closed by a landslide. All travelers were being redirected east through the mountains, through Loma Verde. My hand went still inside hers. Mara noticed immediately. "What is it?" I looked toward the mountains. There are places a man leaves because they hold nothing for him, and there are places he leaves because they hold too much. Loma Verde was the second kind. It was the last town where I had seen June alive, the town where the doctors told me there was nothing more they could do, the town where I signed away. My ranch, because I no longer cared who owned the earth beneath my feet, and it was where a man named Silas Vale still lived. Silas had called himself my friend once. He had handled the sale of my cattle while June was sick. He had promised to protect the ranch until I returned. Instead, he forged my signature, emptied my accounts, and sold the property to a mining company before June was even buried. By the time I understood what he had done, Silas had bought half of Loma Verde. He had also hired men to make certain I never returned to claim what was mine. I had spent 3 years telling myself the ranch no longer mattered, but it had never been about the land. It was about the final promise I made to June, that I would not let the home we built disappear. I had broken that promise. Mara squeezed my hand. "Coy?" "The road just changed," I said. She followed my eyes toward the mountains. "Then we change with it." "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." "There's a man in Loma Verde who took everything I had left." Her expression became serious. "Is he dangerous?" "Yes." "Is he more dangerous than Devon?" "In a different way." Mara released my hand, but only so she could turn and face me fully. "You stood between me and the man I was afraid to face." "That was different." "Why?" "Because you were trying to survive." "And what are you trying to do?" I did not answer. The truth was, I did not know. Part of me wanted to reclaim the ranch. Part of me wanted to look Silas in the eyes and ask whether he had ever regretted what he had done. And another part, the oldest and ugliest part, wanted to make him afraid. Mara seemed to see every one of those answers in my face. "You don't have to face him alone," she said. "I've already brought enough danger into your life." "No, you brought me out of it." Before I could answer, Dagger lifted his head. His ears turned toward the abandoned gas station below us. A vehicle was parked behind the building. Black pickup, new bodywork, dark windows, the same kind of truck Devon had driven at the Koran Ranch. I reached for the rifle in the saddle scabbard. Mara saw the vehicle and froze. "Is that him?" "I don't know." The driver's door stood open. No one moved around the building. I mounted Dagger. "Stay here." "No." "Mara, I'm not waiting alone beside the road while you disappear." Her voice left no room for argument. She climbed into her truck, started the engine and followed as I rode carefully down the ridge. The gas station had been abandoned for years. Its windows were broken and the old pumps had rusted into the ground. Wind moved through the empty building with a low whistle. The black pickup was empty. Its engine was still warm. There was blood on the driver's seat. Not much, but enough. I followed a trail of drops around the back of the building. A man lay against the wall. Ricky, the young man who had stood beside Devon at the Koran Ranch. He was alive, but barely. His face was swollen. One eye had closed completely. His shirt was soaked with blood near his ribs. Mara stopped several feet away. "Ricky?" He opened his good eye. When he saw her, fear crossed his face. Not anger, not loyalty. Fear. "He found us," Ricky whispered. "Devon?" Mara asked. Ricky shook his head weakly. "No, the other man." I crouched beside him. "What other man?" Ricky stared at me. Recognition slowly replaced the pain in his expression. "You're Coy." The fact that he knew my name sent cold through me. "Who told you that?" Ricky tried to breathe and winced. "Devon called people in Loma Verde, said he needed help finding her, said she was traveling with a man on a horse." Mara moved closer. "Where is Devon?" Ricky's eyes shifted toward the mountains. "He made a deal." "With whom?" I asked. Ricky began to laugh, but the sound became a cough. "The man who owns that town." "Silas." I did not need Ricky to say the name. I felt it before he spoke. "Silas Vale." The wind seemed to stop. Mara looked at me. Ricky reached inside his jacket. I drew my revolver before I realized he was holding only a folded piece of paper. He offered it to me with a trembling hand. "He told me to give you this." "Who did?" Ricky swallowed. "Silas." I opened the paper. There were only 2 lines. The first was written in dark ink. The second looked as though it had been added later by another hand. "Come home, Coy. Bring the woman, or Devon dies first." Mara read the message over my shoulder. Her face lost its colour. I turned the paper over. Something had been attached to the back. A photograph. It showed the porch of my old ranch. The wood had been repaired. The roof had been replaced. The front door was painted red, the way June had always wanted it. A man stood on the porch, Silas Vale. Older than I remembered, but unmistakable. Devon was on his knees in front of him, his hands tied behind his back. Beside Devon stood another figure, a woman wearing June's silver necklace. I stared at the photograph. My mind refused to understand what my eyes were seeing. I had buried that necklace with June. I had placed it around her neck myself before they closed the coffin. Mara touched my arm. "Coy, who is she?" I turned the photograph toward the fading light. The woman's face remained partly hidden beneath the shadow of her hat, but even after 3 years I knew the line of that jaw, the shape of those hands, the scar near her left wrist. The world shifted beneath me. "That's impossible," I whispered. Ricky laughed again, quietly this time. "That's what Silas said you'd say." Mara took the photograph from my shaking hand. "Coy!" I could barely hear her. All I could hear was June's voice from years earlier. "Promise me you won't give up on our home." I had watched them lower her coffin into the earth. I had stood beside the grave until everyone else left. I had spent 3 years mourning a woman who might not have been inside it. In the distance, beyond the abandoned station, headlights appeared along the mountain road. 1 pair, then another, then 5 more. Vehicles descending toward us. Ricky looked at them and began struggling to stand. "They're coming." "How many men does Silas have?" I asked. Ricky's answer was almost lost beneath the rising wind. "Enough to own the sheriff." Mara grabbed my hand. "We have to leave." I looked toward Loma Verde. For 3 years, I had ridden in every direction except the one that led home. Now home was calling me back, with Devon as a prisoner, with Mara marked as a target, and with a dead woman standing on my porch. I helped Ricky into Mara's truck and climbed onto Dagger. The first vehicle turned off the mountain road and accelerated toward the abandoned station. Mara lowered her window. "Which way?" Ahead of us, the southern highway was closed. Behind us, armed men were approaching. To the east waited Loma Verde and every ghost I had failed to bury. I pulled the rifle from its scabbard. "Toward the mountains." Mara stared at me. "You're taking us to Silas?" "No." I looked at the photograph one final time. "I'm taking us to June." Mara put the truck into gear. Dagger turned toward the mountain road. Behind us, the first gunshot broke the evening silence, and together we rode toward the town that had already destroyed my life once.